In the mid-1600s, the country of Japan had issued seclusion laws which allowed for no foreign influences. Japanese leaders wanted to keep their country free from other cultures, other religions, and any foreign trade. This isolation lasted over 200 years until the arrival of the United States naval officer Commodore Matthew C. Perry. In 1853, Commodore Perry set foot in Japan and used his influence to begin the reversal of this isolation policy. By forcing Japan to open its doors to the outside world, the country began to learn from its exchanges with the United States. Japan's technology soon surpassed ours, and before long, Japan became a world player and a force to be reckoned with, and all because of one man. Matthew C. Perry was born in Newport, Rhode Island in 1794, the son of U.S. Navy Captain Christopher Perry. At an early age of 17, he pursued a career in the Navy like his father and older brother. He served in several wars, most notably in the Mexican-American War and the War of 1812. He quickly rose through the ranks and was very successful. Commodore Perry was very proud of the Navy and wanted to see it continue to succeed. He saw the need for an education for new seamen and helped establish the curriculum for the U.S. Naval Academy. More importantly, he wanted to modernize the Navy. Once he was promoted to captain, he oversaw the construction of the Navy's second steamboat, the USS Fulton, in 1837. Because he organized naval engineers and pushed for modernization, he earned the title the Father of the Steam Navy. At the same time, Japan was still under Sakoku, which is translated to locked country. Foreigners were not allowed to enter Japan or be subject to harsh treatment, including death penalties. Sakoku was meant to shelter Japan and its leaders from the religious and cultural influences. It kept Japan conflict-free for 200 years, but it also kept the country inferior. The Japanese were oblivious to the Industrial Revolution happening in the other countries. In 1851, President Fillmore authorized Commodore Perry to sail to Japan to return shipwrecked Japanese sailors and request for any American sailors stranded in Japan to be returned home. At the same time, the president wanted Perry to force Japan to begin trade with the United States. Although Perry accepted this task, he wanted to do more, and he was always looking for ways to improve the U.S. Navy. He did as much research as possible about Japan to gain a better understanding. It was challenging because Japan had remained so isolated and most foreigners knew very little about the country. However, Perry knew that California had many new American ports for the naval ships to use, and Japan was on the same latitude as California. Any travel from the Pacific side of the United States would lead directly to Japan first. It only took 18 days to travel from California to Japan. The Navy's steamships needed to get fuel and provisions, and Perry heard rumors of large coal deposits in Japan. Many agreed with Perry that the trade between the United States and Japan would ultimately benefit both countries, and many Americans were eager to explore this new isolated land. In November 1852, Perry sailed with 4 ships, 2 of which were steam-powered, to the land of the rising sun. He went with intention of peace, encouraging trade, and sharing some American technology. His goal was to deliver a letter from the President Fillmore to the Japanese Emperor asking for friendship between the two nations. President Fillmore's letter is addressed to his great and good friend and asks for Japan and America to live in friendship and have commercial trade with each other. He goes on to acknowledge that because the world has changed, it was time for Japan to change their laws about foreigners. Commodore Perry landed in Tokyo Bay on July 8, 1853. The Japanese people had never seen steamships and described them as giant dragons puffing smoke, alien ships of fire. In fear, they erected an army and were ready to fight. Many Japanese did not even know a country called America existed and did not know how to react to these foreigners. 4 days later, Perry was asked to leave and let the Japanese decide if they even wanted to receive the letter. Perry refused to leave and wanted to deliver the letter himself. However, the Americans did not know that the emperor did not have any true power under the new laws. Perry stated that if the president's letter was not answered soon, he would consider his country insulted and would not hold himself accountable for the consequences. Perry's strategy in his encounters with the Japanese was to impress and intimidate them at the same time. He brought many gifts to the emperor, including a model of a working steam locomotive, telescope, telegraph, and liquors. All these gifts were meant to impress upon the Japanese that the Western culture was superior. At the same time, he showed the Japanese his ships equipped with modern steam engines, cannons, and guns. His ships proved to the Japanese that he was willing to use force if he needed to. Commodore Perry presented the Japanese with a white flag and informed them that if they ever chose to fight, the Americans would destroy them. Perry also asked his men to address him only as Admiral, and he took to hiding on the ship. This trick worked, and the Japanese began to regard Perry as high and mighty. The Japanese decided to accept a letter from President Fillmore. They felt merely accepting a letter did not violate their seclusion laws. The timing was perfect for Perry because provisions were diminishing for his men. He received provisions and left Tokyo Bay and sailed for Hong Kong, promising to return the following year for a reply. In February 1854, Perry returned to Tokyo Bay 6 months earlier than promised. This time, his fleet consisted of 9 heavily armed ships and 1,600 men. Again, this encounter was meant to intimidate the Japanese, who referred to the fleet as the Black Ships. Because the Japanese were impressed with the American industrial advances, they agreed to help negotiate a treaty. Perry was allowed to land at Kanagawa, and after a month of negotiations, the Treaty of Kanagawa was signed on March 31, 1854. The treaty provided for a peaceful relationship between Japan and the United States. Not only did the pact assure good treatment of shipwrecked seamen, it permitted our naval ships to refuel and get provisions in 2 Japanese ports, Shimoda and Hakodate. It also arranged for U.S. diplomats to reside in these cities to further trade relations. Although it didn't allow for any trade necessarily, the treaty contained a most favored nation clause. This meant that any future concessions Japan granted to other countries would also be granted to the United States. For instance, if Japan decided to begin trading with any other country, they must also trade with the United States as well. The Treaty of Kanagawa was not welcomed by most Japanese who were used to the isolationist policy. They did not welcome Americans into their lands, and they were not supportive of exchanges with foreigners. After many years of no conflict, Japanese leaders suddenly found their own people in a people. It wasn't until 1868 that the Meiji Emperor decree was handed down abolishing the feudal system, ending the 220-year isolation policy. Commodore Perry unlocked the doors to Japan using his strategy of impressing and simultaneously intimidating them. These exchanges with the Japanese led to major reforms in Japan in the 1860s. After Sakoku ended, Japan was free to enter the technological and industrial revolution. In 1873, Japan had followed Perry's example and had secured 26 steamships. They soon became one of the most formidable Asian powers in the Pacific. Commodore Perry returned to the United States in 1855 a hero. He was given a reward of $20,000 and promoted to Rear Admiral. He became an authority on the Far East. He spent his final years writing his memoirs and died in 1858 of heart failure. Both the United States and Japan recognized the work of Commodore Perry. There are memorials in Rhode Island, at the United States Naval Academy, and in Japan. Japan also has an annual celebration called the Black Ship Festival to mark the day Perry arrived. There are also museums to commemorate Commodore Perry in both countries. The powerful city of Tokyo and its contributions to the world's technology are a direct result of Commodore Perry, the man solely responsible for the opening of the doors of Japan to foreign encounters and exchanges.